So I mentioned earlier Lawrence and Lorsch, the notion that when an organization gets more and more complex, more and more departments, it grows in size, what they call differentiation. The need to integrate, that is, coordinate and collaborate across departments, also goes up. So whether or not senior management's paying attention to these integrative processes is dependent on their assumptions and understanding of this relationship. Some of the integrative mechanisms that people have used, it would be the pyramid supervision. The boss looks over one group of people, then that boss looks over another group of people, and so forth up the pyramid. The problem with this mechanism is that it tends to be slow and bureaucratic. Meetings are often used as a way of integrating diverse activities. Of course, the quality of the meetings will affect the quality of the integration that occurs. Bad meetings can actually have a negative effect on social and organizational capital. Integrated product development teams, we've talked about that in a previous segment. The question of, do the leadership of those teams really understand the concept and run high-quality meetings based on diverse membership. Organizational publications are another way that companies tend to try to share information and data across departments and divisions and locations. This tends to be a relatively weak mechanism. Program managers, particularly in matrix organizations, are also seen as integrative mechanisms. The strength of the individual's leadership, their ability to manage budget, of course, will play into their strength. And then we go back to the northern ball, the personal characteristics and traits of each of the individual program or project managers. Some companies may have several hundred or even thousands of these, depending on their size and scope, typically in the defense industry. Each of them running a program, and each of them based on their personal characteristics, either effectively or ineffectively, managing their program or project. Personal networks, the people you know, the people that you connect with. So people who tend to be more extroverted may have more robust and extensive personal networks. People more on the introverted side of the scale may not have the natural inclination to pick up the phone, call people, find out what's going on, draw those networks in advance of needing them, as we talked in developing effective teams at Lucent in an earlier segment. So again, your personal characteristics on the northern ball, your inclination to network, your skill in networking, whether or not the culture encourages or discourages this kind of activity. There's a lot of interesting research on networking. Rob Cross at the University of Virginia has done wonderful work in being able to diagram and sort out what personal networks look like using the frequency and the intensity of interactions between people, and he can actually visually diagram what personal communicative networks look like in a department or a division or a company. But these networks are extremely important as an integrative mechanism, and again it comes back to the individual inclinations of the program managers. If they're not inclined to do it, it probably isn't going to happen even if the company encourages it. There may or may not be rewards for networking and integrating. So the company may say, we want you to work together with other departments so that we can service the needs of our customers. On the other hand, if we're paying people based on their individual achievements, so that this department is rewarded based on their sales, this department is rewarded on their sales, this would actually inhibit their inclination to collaborate and create a more synergistic, integrated organizational culture. So you can make organizational design decisions that will actually be counter-purpose, dysfunctional, corrosive to the kind of, at least what you say you're trying to create, organizational culture. Shared values is an important integrative mechanism. If we all believe the same thing, the details about how we're going to implement it may become less significant. And I think many organizations, particularly in the private sector, overlook the power of shared values. They assume that everybody wants to do their job and be professionals and put their feelings aside and just be an adult about it and go about your job. Well, as we've described and discussed in an earlier segment, level 3 emotions revolving around purpose and vision and pride and identity and membership are very important, and management teams that overlook the power of creating a shared value set, even if it's something mundane like creating electrical parts or distributing electrical parts or creating concrete water pipes. Leaders, in my view, have the responsibility of clarifying and emphasizing the importance of what the company is doing in the broad economic environment so that employees can come away with a sense of pride in what they're doing, rather than just that mercenary concept of I'm exchanging 40 hours of my time for a certain wage, which, by the way, I don't think is high enough anyway. So shared values is an important integrative mechanism. And then, of course, the issue of can we create a common enemy, a principle that Mao Zedong used very effectively in creating, in his era, communist China from a very diverse group of regions which had different languages and different dialects and different values. By creating a common enemy, you can bring people together. One of the elements that works against integration, of course, is turf building. If I want to have my little part of the organization and it's going to be my fiefdom or my kingdom or my area, and I'm going to manage it the way I want to manage it, compared with what the people might be doing in the next wing or the next building or in the next geographic site, this can be very corrosive and detrimental to building a cohesive organization. This might be partially genetic in nature. We decry turf building, and yet we see it in every generation for a long time. Perhaps there's a gene, as Lawrence and Lorsch suggest in their book, Driven. There might be genes for the acquisition of assets and the protection of those assets. So in some ways, by trying to create a integrative, large-scale collaborative organization, we're actually working against human nature. One could argue that the genetic history of human beings hasn't kept up with the evolution of our society and culture with the digital age and the creation of a global economy, that these local turf tendencies, to the point of civil wars and one could almost argue self-destruction in various parts of the world, are counter to the idea of creating a global economy where we're willing to compromise our desire to build turf for the sake of creating a large and stable economic system. It could be in part because of a desire to have a certain individuality in the midst of large organizations that look to be very strong, and one doesn't want to be weak, so one tries to create one's own little part of the organization where one can feel a sense of power and control. Turf building is expensive, though, because you tend to duplicate resources if you're not sharing them. So whether it's human resource management or contracts or procurement or distribution, you pick your favorite part of the value chain. If different parts of the organization have built turf kingdoms, fiefdoms around those disciplines, around pieces of those links in the value chain, this can be very expensive. And so in matrix organizations or quasi-hybrid organizations where part of the organization is centralized and the other parts are not, the goal is, of course, to reduce the cost of having those duplicated resources. And the danger is then that the services that those centralized departments can deliver are eroded because they're more generic and less specific and less applicable to each of the various divisions in the organization. So there are a lot of trade-offs to be made in organizational architecture. Turf building tends to be bureaucratic, and it slows down decision making, and it creates multiple subcultures within an organization rather than a single culture.